Assalamu alaikum. While I share the link. Bismillahi walhamdulillahi wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. So we continue with our investigation into the Madhab, and right now we're focused on the Maliki Madhab. We skipped around a little, but we talked a little bit about the life of Imam Malik, the environment of Medina, and now we're focusing on the reference personas in the Madhab. What I mean by that is that in the Maliki Madhab, Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, he focused on the knowledge of 7 people, and they were considered the transmitters to him of the knowledge of the people of Medina. So Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, he focused heavily his madhab on the knowledge that was present in Medina as being representative of the way of the Sunnah. And so that is not just an idea, but it was a reality that had a lot to do with leading scholars of Medina. So that Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi, he revolved his knowledge around the fuqaha sab'a, or the 7 fuqaha of Medina. And Sheikh Abu Zahra rahmatullahi alayhi, he says we should briefly mention the 7 fuqaha since they were largely responsible for the transmission of the knowledge of Medina and were the source of most of Imam Malik's knowledge. And so last session we covered Sayyid ibn Musayyib radiyallahu anhu and his relationship to the fiqh of Malik in brief, as has been laid out by Sheikh Abu Zahra. One of the points that was mentioned is actually a two-angled point. One is that Sayyid, he had married into the family of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhum, and he married the daughter of Abu Hurairah, so much of the ahadith that he dealt with came from Abu Hurairah. The other thing is that he learned much of the fiqh of Umar, and he became known as the main transmitter of the fiqh of Umar. Sheikh Abu Zahra says he learned the fiqh of Umar from his companions to such an extent that he was considered the main transmitter of the fiqh of Umar. Imam Shafi'i rahmatullahi alayhi, he considered Sayyid bin Musayyib as to be the most knowledgeable from the people of his tabaqa, or his class in time. Now we go to Urwa bin Zubayr radiallahu anhum. Urwa was considered to be the second of the fuqaha as-sab'a, or the 7 fuqaha. Fuqaha as-sab'a is the term used in the Arabic. He was considered to be one of those imams who formulated the fiqh of Medina in the time of the Tabi'een. He was the brother of Abdullah bin Zubayr and the nephew of Aisha. Who was he? The brother of Abdullah ibn Zubayr and the nephew of Aisha radiallahu anhum ajma'in. I'm using it in the plural because as I am reflecting and reading, I'm thinking about the Sahaba as a whole. So as a point of regard and respect for them, I'm asking Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to be pleased with them. Urwa radiallahu anhu, He was born during the time in which Uthman bin Affan radiallahu anhu was the Imam or the Khalifa. He lived through the uprisings, seditions, Sheikh Abu Zahra is indicating to, or at least the translation, which occurred after the murder of Uthman, until the political authority was settled or there was some stability with the Marwanids. Although his brother Abdullah bin Zubair wrested the rule from Abdul Malik bin Marwan, and the conflict became intense between them, it is not known that he became involved in the business or helped his brother in any way. It is clear that he completely devoted himself to knowledge, to studying fiqh and hadith. In hadith, he was, as his student Imam Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri said, a sea undiminished by buckets, meaning that his knowledge was overflowing. Sa'id bin Musayyib had the most fiqh of the Tabi'un in Medina. Urwa had the most hadith, radiallahu anhum ajma'in. He learned the fiqh of the deen from a group of the companions, particularly Aisha. And if we go back earlier in the first session, we mentioned that Sa'id ibn Musayyib radiallahu anhu used to say, do not ask me about an ayah of the Quran. Ask the one who claims that none of it is hidden from him. And in this he was talking about Ikrimah. So Sa'id bin Musayyib was known for being masterful in the knowledge of fiqh. Ikrimah was known to be masterful in the knowledge of tafsir. And Urwa was known, Urwa bin Zubair radiallahu anhum ajmain, was known to be a master in hadith. Urwa had the most hadith. He learned the fiqh of the deen from a group of the companions, particularly Aisha. And so we noted before that Sa'id was closely tied into Abu Huraira. Here, Sheikh Abu Zahra is indicating that Urwa was closely tied to Aisha, radiallahu anhum ajmain. She was foremost in general knowledge rules for inheritance, the allotment in inheritance. Al-Qasim bin Muhammad, the son of her brother, took knowledge from her, as did Urwa, the son of her sister Asma. Urwa was the person with the greatest knowledge of the hadith of Aisha, the hadith that were related by Aisha, our mother, radiallahu anha. He said, before Aisha died, I saw that I had become one of the four authorities. I said, if she dies, there will be no hadith, which will be lost from those of the hadith that she knows. I have memorized all of them. It is clear that Urwa was concerned with recording the fiqh and hadith he learned, and it is related that he wrote books, but he was afraid that they might become books alongside of the book of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, and so he destroyed them. And that's something to be considered. That's the methodology of the companions. Imam Ahmed rahmatullahi alayhi was of that same approach. Actually, the codification of the madhab of Imam Ahmed took place after his death by his family, the students. But Imam Ahmed, that was not his goal. So that's why you see most of Imam Ahmed's writings, or what's attributed to him, comes back to the Musnad, comes back to the collection of ahadith that he gathered, and you see that the fiqh and the opinions and the statements of Imam Ahmed are conveyed later on in the madhab, but Imam Ahmed was emphatic on the point of people of knowledge having to focus themselves, preoccupy themselves with familiarity with the Quran and the Ahadith. That doesn't exclude learning what other people have said regarding the Quran and the Ahadith. But what we see in the early generation, and this is how we can integrate a proper understanding. What we see in the early generation is this whole process of the development of fiqh. But the point of centrality, as far as references are concerned, or the sources of knowledge which are central to them, is the Quran and the Sunnah. What happens later on with the development of the madhab in the late period, when we start talking about the history of fiqh, is that the period of taqlid sets in. And so in the period of taqlid, there's benefit and harm. It's not just all beneficial, and it's not all harmful. And the reality of the situation is that with time, people become more and more less familiar with the Quran and the Sunnah. That's the condition of the Muslims in the U.S. today. Familiarity with anything in Islam is not necessarily widespread. That's just the truth. Communities are being based on the opinions of people, and their opinions are not necessarily grounded in Islam. And usually boards or whoever founds the masjid and so on and so forth, or whoever is doing da'wah. And it's not necessarily the case that those people are trained in knowledge to be able to engage in da'wah. And so here, in any event, the example that's given, and you see the same with Sayyid bin Musayyib, not only was he knowledgeable regarding the Quran in terms of what needed to be known, maybe he didn't root himself in tafsir the same way that Iqrimah did, but as far as the fiqh is concerned, the ahadith pertaining to the judgments of the Prophet and the companions, and their statements alongside of what was narrated in relation to the Quran and the Sunnah, right? That's what we say. There's ahadith that they base themselves on, and then there's statements. We need to separate between the two. So I had to pause for a minute to say, there's a difference between what's related as something being a statement of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then there's the issue that comes to the statements of the companions. Some things that the companions related is directly a statement from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in their own words, but they may not mention it directly, literally, I should say. They may not mention it literally, but a meaning is that came from the Prophet. And then alayhi salatu wasalam, and then there's things that they come to conclude based upon the ijtihad. And so Urwa, he looked for the judgments, the 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 judgments as we would understand them in the sense of like court cases type of idea. So let me be clear on this point again. The narrations that come from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and from the companions, they're not all the same in content. Forget about the issue of strength and weakness. Let's assume we're talking about narrations that are strong, narrations that are reliable, narrations which are dependable, that we can use as proofs or that we can use as references. And so the reality of the situation is that not all of those narrations are going to be clearly related to fiqh. That's one point. To the knowledge of the halal and haram. Some things may relate to points of aqidah, points of good character, so on and so forth. So some of what's narrated is going to pertain to the knowledge of the halal and haram, and is going to be a judgment. And some of that is going to be that which is directly attributable stated by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of it is going to be what is attributed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam indirectly, so that a companion may indicate that from the Sunnah is so and so. Well, that's an indication that that's not from his opinion, right? That came from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Although that narration, you won't hear that anyone says it was related by the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They said that it was related by this companion or that companion, and then the content of what's related, that companion will say from the Sunnahs this. That's considered part of the hadith literature attributable to the Prophet. Then there are positions that are narrated from the companions with regard to matters of the knowledge of halal and haram, judgments, like in the case like of court cases. And so then that becomes part of what the judgments of the companions. And so narrations are of different types. That's the point that I wanted to get to earlier. I want to make sure that that's clear. I may not have been clear in the way that I communicated that, but hopefully now that's clear. So Sa'id bin Musayyib, he collected the judgments of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions, right? And so Urwa here, he collected the hadith, and in this case, he focused on a specific type of fiqh. He focused on the knowledge of inheritance, right? And so Aisha became a fountain of knowledge or a pool of knowledge, and students were developed around her. So it said here that Urwa was the person with the greatest knowledge of the hadith of Aisha. Right. It is clear that Urwa was concerned with recording the fiqh and hadith he learned, and it is related that he wrote books, but he was afraid that they may become books alongside the book of Allah, and so he destroyed them. His son Hisham related that he had books which he burned on the day of the battle of Harra. He later said he regretted that. However, and used to say, I would rather have them in my possession than my family and property twice over. He was a hadith transmitter and a faqih who followed the path of hadith, and he did not give fatwa in the way that Ibn Musayyib did. He had a different methodology. And so now we also continue with Abu Bakr bin Abdurrahman, who's the third of the fuqaha al-sab'a, or the seven of the fuqaha of Medina that were the sources for the knowledge of the fiqh of Malik, or the madhab of Imam Malik, the primary sources with regard to the knowledge of Medina. The third of those of the fuqaha was Abu Bakr bin Abdurrahman bin al-Harith. He died in 94. And so did Urwa. He was devout and a person of ibadah and zuhd. He did without much in the world. In other words, he had a simple life. They called him the Zahid of Quraysh. That's the extent. He related the hadith from Aisha and Salama. He was a faqih and a person of narration or hadith transmission. He did not give fatwa as Ibn Musayyib did. Ibn Musayyib gave fatwa when the others would not. Tradition dominated his fiqh. So he was a person of narration. Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad bin Abi Bakr is the fourth. So Aisha now becomes the centerpiece here. First it was Umar, now Aisha, with Urwa and Abu Bakr ibn Abdurrahman, and now Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, radiallahu anhum ajma'in. The fourth of the seven of the fuqaha of Medina was Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. He was the nephew of Aisha radiallahu anha. He died in 108, and he learned hadith and fiqh from his auntie or his aunt, and from Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma. He was a transmitter of hadith. He criticized the use of hadith if his text was put before the book of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala and the well-known sunnah. He was a faqih, and so he had both fiqh and hadith. His famous student, Abu Zinad and Abdullah ibn Dhakwan, or Dhakwan, sorry about that, sometimes the transliteration is disturbing. He said about him, I never saw a faqih with more knowledge than Al-Qasim. I never saw anyone who had more knowledge of the Sunnah than him. It is clear that, as well as piety, he had aspiration and cleverness and resolve in things. That's why Imam Malik related that Umar bin Abdul Aziz said, if I had authority in the matter, I would appoint the blind one of Banu Taym, meaning Al-Qasim ibn Muhammad. Here we see the dedication that people had to combining ibadah and ilm. May Allah grant us that reality. Not only that, we see families of knowledge, and we mentioned that before. So the Muslim community was structured on this reality, the reality of the knowledge of the deen and the practice of the deen, and families rooted in the deen. So any way toward revival, like Imam Malik said, that we will not correct, or something to the effect that correcting the correction of what comes after is by what corrected those who came before. In other words, the correction of the ummah it won't be corrected except by the same things which corrected the first generation that came into the deen from kufr, with the exception of the minority. So Ubaydullah bin Abdullah bin Utbah bin Mas'ud is the fifth of the fuqaha as-sab'ah. So Ubaydullah ibn Abdullah bin Utbah, he transmitted from Ibn Abbas. So we see that Al-Qasim bin Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr, he learned fiqh and hadith from Aisha and from Ibn Abbas. So now Ibn Abbas becomes central. So he transmitted from Ibn Abbas, and he transmitted from Aisha and Abu Hurairah. And those are the three main figures that are playing a role as far as the axial points of knowledge, as far as the references. We see that Umar, Abu Hurairah, then Aisha, and now Ibn Abbas, these, are some of the companions that are being drawn from by the later time. So we see that the fiqh of Imam Malik, rooted in the fuqaha sab'ah, is rooted in the knowledge of the Salaf. He was the teacher of Umar bin Abdul Aziz, that's Ubaydullah bin Abdullah bin Utbah ibn Mas'ud, and had a profound effect on his intellect and person. And Umar Abdul Aziz was a person of ilm who took political lead in the ummah, and he had piety to him. He was a major shift in the culture of his time among the political leadership, in that he exemplified the deen in practice. May Allah grant us people like that. In addition to his knowledge of fiqh and hadith and his good character, he composed poetry. And he died around 98 or 99 after Hijrah. There's some debate about that. Sulaiman bin Yasar is the sixth of the fuqaha sab'ah, and they say that he was the client of Maymunah bint al-Harith, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So all these people had intimacy with regard to the household of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one way or another, right? They were intimate, in that they had relationship and ties. the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Maymuna bin Harith. It is said that she gave him a kitaba, a contract, and stipulated an amount of money he must pay for his freedom. It is reported that he asked permission to visit Aisha. He said she recognized my voice. She said, is it Sulaiman? Then she asked, have you paid what she stipulated for you? I said, yes, nearly. There's only a small amount outstanding. She said, come in. You are still owned as long as you still owe anything. Ability. He transmitted from Zayd bin Thabit, Abdullah bin Umar, Abu Huraira, and the wives of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Maymuna, Aisha, and Salama. Sulaiman had fine understanding. His knowledge and understanding of fiqh were increased by his study of people's affairs and knowledge of their states. That's another element now that's being added. So Ubaydullah had, you see that there's some sort of focus on the Arabic language and that he composed poetry. You see that some of them had extreme devoutness and ilm together. And they combined fiqh and hadith. Urwa was not only a person of fiqh, like we say, but also he had a specialized knowledge in inheritance, right, and the rulings that come along with that. And Sa'id bin Musayyib had the ability to give fatwa on issues that were not necessarily clear in the book and the sunnah. Right. And so here, when we come to Al-Qasim bin Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, who was the fourth of the Fuqaha Sab'ah, we see that he had a certain understanding of how it is that the Sunnah relates to the Quran. And he was a person that was extremely knowledgeable in fiqh and the hadith, or the Sunnah overall. And he had the ability to problem solve. So there's a certain type of thinking that's transmitted in that regard. So Ibn Musayyib, he mentioned he had the fiqh of Umar, and the fiqh of Umar, it was future oriented, but not future oriented in the sense of hypothetical. It was future oriented in the sense of being able to deal with events that had not occurred, address those issues, and think about the interests of the ummah, which is different than hypothetical fiqh. And then, from Sulaiman bin Yasar, comes, sorry, I got a little distracted because I'm getting some messages coming in of importance. In any event, Ubaydullah bin Abdullah bin Utbah ibn Mas'ud, he was the teacher of Umar Abdul Aziz. So we see that now, out of this circle of ilm, people are being trained to lead the ummah. And so Sulaiman ibn Yasar, or Yasir, he was a person that was involved in the marketplace in Medina. And he was the overseer of the market of Medina when Umar Abdul Aziz was governor. And the last is Khadija ibn Zayd ibn Thabit, who was the seventh of the people of Medina, known as the Fuqaha Sab'ah. He was a faqih in the ability to reason in fatwa, like his father Zayd, who was well known in that regard and also in the knowledge of inheritance. That is why he had fewer hadith and many fatwas based on opinion. Because of his great knowledge of the shares of inheritance, he used to distribute people's inheritance according to the book of Allah Ta'ala. Musa ibn Abdullah, he said the Kharija and Talha ibn Abdurrahman gave fatwa in their time period. People accepted their statements and they distributed inheritance, houses, palm trees, and property. And they wrote out documents for people. In addition to his knowledge, fiqh and fatwa, and his connection to the people at the beginning of his life, Khadija was one of the devout worshippers of Medina. Worship moved him at the end of his life to withdraw and be alone, which is why not much of his fiqh and knowledge spread. These are the Fuqaha Sab'ah, who are considered to be the imams, the pivotal imams that the Maliki Madhab draws from. Those are the seven Fuqaha who, together with those of their generation who also knew the fiqh of the companions and the Prophet ﷺ, formed the school which formulated the fiqh of Medina and gave it a distinctive character. Its basis was given fatwa according to the fatwas of the companions of the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, and proceeding in their own way in respect of deriving judgments when they did not find the directly relevant fatwa which had been passed down. Sometimes they would exercise ijtihad according to their own opinions, but only in the way in which the companions had done, and they did not complicate the ramifications of problems in the way that the people of Iraq, the school of Iraq, had done. They kept things a little more simple and clear. It should be pointed out that those fuqaha were not traditionists. They were just not focused on hadith only. They were people of hadith and also people of fiqh who studied the fiqh of the first generations and how they deal with the situation, how they focus and they function. They were traditionists and legalists who studied the fiqh of the first generation, and they deduced from it and gave fatwas when they did not find the tradition from the Prophet or his companions, using their intellects to arrive at a deduction based well-known judgments of the Prophet ﷺ. They imitated the minhaj or the manahij, the methodologies of the earlier generation in coming to conclusions. And so they combine both a level of reasoning, what we call fiqh, and basically that came back. You can see that Al-Qasim bin Muhammad bin Abi Bakr, it says he criticized the use of hadith if his text was put before the Book of Allah and the well-known Sunnah. So that concept is an usuli concept. It means that they had a knowledge of the sources of the Sharia and the knowledge of how to deal with them. And so that's not just an issue of relating hadith like some people like to do without having an understanding of how to utilize those hadith in relation to the Quran, the Arabic language and principles, and the fiqh that came before. Some of them have mainly knowledge of hadith and little fiqh and fatwa, like Urwa bin al-Zubair, but most of them concentrated on fatwa and fiqh. I wouldn't say that they were devoid of hadith. That's just not the reality. You just don't see that. But this would seem to suggest that the fiqh of opinion had a prominent position among them, which would in turn tend to make them seem similar to the people of Iraq. And there's some truthfulness to that the people of Iraq and Medina at a certain point, they overlap with each other. But the distinctiveness of the fiqh of Iraq will be seen when we take up the Hanafi madhab. The Medinans only gave fatwa about matters which had actually arisen, like we said before. They were future oriented, but not hypothetical. Future oriented, meaning that If an issue came up that was unprecedented, they dealt with it. They just didn't remain silent. The fiqh of opinion was used by them only to derive principles from the fatwa of the companions and the judgments of the Prophet ﷺ, which had been transmitted to them and were being acted upon a daily basis, acted upon on a daily basis around them in the city of Medina. That's what they called the Sunnah. The fiqh of those seven scholars was learned by Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, Rabi'at al-Rai, and all of their generation. Those were the teachers of Malik. Then Malik learned from that generation. His sheikhs included some for whom fiqh and opinion was predominant. Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri is known to be an Imam Hadith in narration. In others for whom Hadith was dominant, Hadith dominated the fiqh of Ibn Shihab, and opinion rather than uh, Hadith came. And opinion. Oh, Hadith dominated the fiqh of Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri, and opinion rather than Hadith. That's not a. There's an error here. He's comparing Ibn Shihab az-Zuhri to Rabi'at al-Rai, who was one of the Imams of Malik and Yahya bin Sa'id. So for them, the whole concept of the reasoning came first, and Ibn Shihab Hadith came first. Thus, it is not strange that we find that opinion played. When he says opinion, he's talking about juristic reasoning. He's talking about the methodology of fiqh and how to deal with the text. It played a large role in the fiqh of Malik. And that needs some more clarification, but we'll stop there because there's some details to that. It starts to open up now in the section that's entitled Rai wala Hadith, or the then after that he's going to talk a little bit about Aqidah issues that arose in the time of Malik, and then he'll get into Malik's fiqh in more detail. And so until next time, inshallah, if Allah allows, we ask Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala to accept from us, to forgive us, to guide us, to help us, to aid us, to strengthen us, and all of the Muslim community, and to allow us to be people of knowledge and ibadah. And the same for our children. Assalamu alaikum.